In the last lesson, we talked about the 3 simple branding steps: authenticity, audience, and action. Now, what you may have recognized is that in this course, we've actually already covered authenticity and audience. So you are already 2/3 of the way through your new brand strategy. We're going to spend the rest of the time in this module talking about the action element of this simple branding process. Now, there are 2 ways to take action and communicate to an audience. You can communicate to an audience verbally, and you can communicate to an audience visually. Communicating visually has to do with things like logos and colors, and we're going to talk about that in the next lesson. So right now, what I want us to talk about is your verbal communication strategy, or another term for that is simply your brand messaging. So let's get started. The number one thing I want you to remember as we dive into this lesson is this: your goal as a brand is to draw people to you or drive them away. And you're going to do this by taking a stand. In this lesson, we are going to cover 2 different messaging strategies. The first one is going to be your brand positioning statements. And the second one is going to be your unique value proposition. I've got worksheets for you to fill out on that, so if you'd like to stop and print those out right now, you can take some notes as we go. Now, both types of messaging statements, both your unique value proposition and your brand positioning statements, are going to tie back to the things that you learned about yourself in Module 1, specifically your powers, your principles, and your purpose. Together, each of these messaging statements, along with other elements that are now important to your business that we talked about in the fixtures module and the framework module, will combine to create powerful messaging statements for your brand and your business. Let's start by talking about your brand positioning statements. On your worksheets, there'll be some questions, and you might want to look at those as we walk through this. The first thing I want you to think about before developing your brand positioning statement is, what are your messaging goals? What do you want people to know? And what message do you want to get across? It has to be strong. In your business, there is not room for more than 2 or 3 brand positioning statements, so you need to make sure that these statements are strong and short. Your brand positioning statement needs to communicate what problem your product or service solves. That's an important point to remember. Your brand positioning statement also needs to include information about the kind of benefits your product or service offers your customer. When you identify the problem your product or service solves and the benefit it provides to your customer, you have the basis of a strong positioning statement. Another thing that a strong brand positioning statement does, kind of subconsciously, is it communicates to the customer what sort of transformation that your product or service provides. Or another way to look at that is it communicates to the customer how your product or service makes a difference in their lives. Your brand positioning statement needs to be short, fewer than 12 words. And it's also important to note at this point that you're not actually writing copy. So this brand positioning statement is just something that you'll probably use internally with teammates and contractors or freelancers that you use for helping build your company. So let's use an example to talk about this. Let's say we have Susie who bakes cake. And Susie's really fast at baking cakes, and she delivers cakes. So the main benefit that Susie provides to her customers is she saves them time by turning around her cakes quickly and delivering them to her customer's door. Susie's brand positioning statement is also not pointing out that her cakes might be the most expensive cakes on the market. She's not worried about the prices of her cakes because she's confident that the value of the service that she provides creates a priceless moment for the people who are buying her cakes. They don't have to bake the cakes, they can spend their time with friends and family. Okay, so for every brand positioning statement you have, you need 3 to 4 supporting points. I'm going to talk you through some questions that you can ask yourself to get those 3 and 4 supporting points for each brand positioning statement. And another thing to remember is you don't need more than 2 or 3 brand positioning statements. Anything more than that is going to be hard for your customer to remember and keep track of, and it might end up confusing them. So keep your supporting messaging statements short and sweet, and we'll talk about ways you can use those in social media and in your marketing in one of the future modules. Now, another important point I want you to remember about your brand positioning statement is that you really only need 2 or 3 brand positioning statements. Anything more than 2 or 3 brand positioning statements has the potential to confuse your customer. And if your customer doesn't understand what you're offering or the benefit that you provide, they're going to go someplace where they can understand it. One of the things I learned from Donald Miller in the StoryBrand workshop was that customers don't buy the best product. Customers buy the product that they understand. So your brand positioning statements are very important in helping you communicate the benefits of your product to your customer. Now also, for each of your brand positioning statements, I'd like for you to have 3 to 4 supporting points. And I have a couple of questions to walk through right now that will challenge you to think about the supporting points for your brand positioning statements. Here are 3 questions you can ask yourself. Number 1, this is important because. So back to the example of Susie and her brand positioning statement. Her benefit to her customer is important because the moments a mom can spend with her kids at a birthday party are priceless and are worth far more than the cost of a cake. That would be an important point for Susie to communicate in her supporting statements. The second question you can ask yourself to help you develop a supporting statement is, how does the what help? What I mean by that is Susie's selling cakes. How does that cake help? There might be multiple reasons that it helps, but what are the reasons that Susie wants to communicate to her customers? Maybe it helps because the mom has time to take a shower before the party, or maybe it helps because the mom doesn't have to worry about finding a good cake recipe or a good icing recipe. Susie just needs to figure out which of those points is going to be most attractive to her customer and communicate that. The third question you can ask yourself to develop a supporting point is how. And what I mean by that is, how is the product or service delivered? The how question is a values question, and it explains how Susie's going to deliver that cake. Is she going to deliver it quickly? Is her process going to be seamless? Is the customer going to be able to pay for it online and Susie's not going to have to send them a bill or ask for a check? These are things that relate to process, but anytime a customer is in your process, they're experiencing a value. And so it's really important to think about that at this point. So just a quick recap, those 3 questions are why, what, and how. And those are all in your worksheets to help you develop these strong supporting statements for your brand messaging. Now, 2 more points before we go about developing strong brand positioning statements. The first thing is, just fair warning, you're going to get tired of this brand messaging a long time before your customers do. If you have 2 to 3 strong brand messaging statements, you're just going to get tired of telling people that information. But here's what's important. Your customers are probably not tired of it. And changing your brand messaging over and over again can be really dangerous for your brand. It's important that your brand messaging stay consistent for as long as possible. And I mean 12 to 18 months. If you feel like you're evolving as an entrepreneur, just be careful about how you communicate that to your customers. You don't want to create distrust by displaying a lot of inconsistency as a brand. Now, another thought on that is simply this. If your brand messaging is wrong, it doesn't matter if it's been in place for 3 months or 6 months or 3 years. Scrap it and get it right. It's always more important to evolve to a good place than to stay in a bad place and just keep doing the same thing just because I said don't change it for 12 to 18 months. Now, the final point I want to make to you is this. You need a brand positioning statement for every customer type you have. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say Susie makes cakes for birthday parties and cakes for weddings. Well, the benefits are going to be different to each customer. And what a bride wants in a wedding cake is probably going to be different than what a mom wants who's just ordering a birthday cake. So another thing I see a lot of entrepreneurs doing these days is having multiple brands. A lot of entrepreneurs have a personal brand and sometimes they have a branded product. I even have that with the Day Designer planners. What I want to caution you about at this point is this. Every time you have a different brand, you have a different customer. And every time you have a different customer, you have a different set of messages that need to go out. And if you add to this formula that there are multiple channels for each of those